Ron Els grew up listening to radio during its golden era, and he worked at stations all around the country before landing at St. Louis's top 40 powerhouse KXOK in 1961. He did all sorts of fascinating things, including inventing his own DJ persona. At the time, disc jockeys were using a whole zoo's worth of animal names as their taglines, and while sitting at a diner on Kings Highway, Ron Els came up with his. The top-hatted, fuzzy-eared Johnny Rabbit, the double B and double T on Rabbit, giving the name a bouncing flair. Johnny Rabbit has been a near constant media presence in St. Louis ever since, and Ron Els is a living rock and roll legend, both locally and nationally. Among his many other claims to fame, he helped birth KSHE as the first place on the St. Louis dial where you could hear the heavier psychedelic sounds of hard rock. And it was he who introduced the Beatles, you've heard of them, to thousands of screaming fans at their very first ever U.S. concert at San Francisco's Cow Palace in 1964. I first really got to know Ron about 5 years ago when I was working on research for our St. Louis Sound exhibit that we opened here in 2021. I knew he was somebody that I needed to talk to, and he invited me over to his house to share his wealth of knowledge and show me some of the incredible artifacts in the miniature museum that is his basement. While I was there, I got quite the surprise as I was leaving. I had mentioned offhand to Ron at an earlier time that I had just had the birth of my first child, my son Arthur, who was about 3 weeks old at the time. And as I was leaving Ron's house, he hands me a whole fresh Federhofer's cake that I am to take back home to my wife. So I came to his house for my project and left with a cake. I think that tells you everything you need to know about Ron Els. But you've certainly heard enough from me, and so here he is himself, Johnny Rabbit.
Thank you, Andrew. That was amazing. What a storyteller he is. He didn't have any notes either, like I have to do. Well, thank you all for the warm welcome on this very cold day that's been made warmer by the piano stylings of St. Louis songs by Mary Ann Schulte. And we're all happy that you're here, and I'm honored, of course, that the Missouri Historical Society has created this annual Johnny Rabbit Lecture, which today's is the first. Our subject, the music of St. Louis. And in case you're worried that I'm going to deliver a 1-hour lecture, or maybe even sing a few songs like the St. Louis Blues, you can breathe a sigh of relief as I put together a program featuring several specially selected guest presenters, all with the St. Louis music connection, all except one, and I want to introduce that one for just 1 minute. Chris Nofziger is over here, and Chris has got a book coming out that I think you'll all be interested in. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you so much for having me for just a second. I just want to let you know I'm having a book on Adam Lump and the Western Brewery, which will be coming out on July 9th, just one day before my birthday. I hope you all would maybe take a look at it. I've put a lot of work into it over the last 7 years, and I think it's going to be really sort of groundbreaking research on the Lump family. I think you maybe have all heard of them before. And hope you all get a chance to take a look. It's going to be really just kind of taking a really deep dive into basically German-American brewing here in the Gateway City. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Rabbit, for having me just take a minute to talk about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, very much. Appreciate it. Well, it's almost Christmas time. Here's a little story from Christmas in 1958 about a lady who took her 7-year-old son, Johnny, shopping at Sticks, Bear, and Fuller at Crestwood Plaza. As soon as they got in the store, the little boy said, "I want to see Santa Claus." His mom said, "Johnny, you're going to have to wait because I don't want the store to run out of what I'm here to buy." Well, her son said, "Mom, why do you always make the decisions?" To which his mother replied, "Because I'm an adult, and when you become an adult, you can make the decisions." Johnny thought about that for a couple of minutes and said, "No, I won't, because by then I'll have a wife." First person I contacted to be on the program today was Leonard Slatkin, the conductor emeritus of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and he was pleased to be asked, and I was happy to hear that. But as fate would have it, he had to be in New York City today to start rehearsals with the Manhattan School of Music Symphony Orchestra for a concert that they're presenting this Wednesday. So I thought this over and came up with a way he could be with us today without physically being here. So with the help of Justin, Josh, and Kimmy, and all of the people at the History Museum, and the approval of Jody Sowell, the head of the museum, we decided to record our talk right here, did it at the Lee Auditorium this past Tuesday, and play it for you today. Well, we is not exactly right. That all sounded great. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I had to be admitted to the hospital, which I didn't enjoy. And I could not do the interview. So I really wanted to have Leonard here. So I recall the first time I interviewed Leonard, which was in 1968. That's when he wore very formal attire conducting the orchestra, and he was nicknamed Lenny the Penguin. Well, I figured the interview was off, but I recalled a wonderful 3-page feature about Slatkin on his 80th birthday that was written by Dan Neiman of the Post-Dispatch. It ran in the Post on September 1st. So I called Dan asking, could you do the interview? He said he could, and it was okay with Slatkin too. So that's what happened, and now let's see the result of that meeting. It's Dan Neiman and Leonard Slatkin.
I'm Dan Neiman, features writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I'm here this morning with
Leonard Slatkin, former music director and now conductor laureate of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra.
And Mr. Slatkin, you have 6 Grammy Awards. You have a National Medal of the Arts, which is the highest award that can be given to an artist in the country. You have a gold baton. I don't want to talk about any of that. I want to talk about your piano. And in order to talk about your piano, I think we should probably first talk about your parents. Tell us who your parents were.
Everybody knows my parents. Maybe not by name, but you've heard them all the time. My father, Felix Slatkin, who was born in St. Louis and played his first recital at the age of 12 at the Sheldon.
Good, yeah.
Well, he was the concertmaster of the orchestra at 20th Century Fox from 1937 to about 1953. My mom, Eleanor Aller, was the first cellist at Warner Brothers during the same time and then a bit after that. So as part of the studio system, they were well known. You had any violin solo that was from a Fox picture, it's my dad. Cello solo, Warner's, my mom. And piano solo, Warner's, my uncle, her brother. And that's where the piano comes in, of course. Every household had a piano of some kind. Ours was a 5.5-foot Steinway that our uncle, my brother and I, had purchased for the Slatkin family house, which back then was in a small, simple house in what was back then simple Beverly Hills. It was not as complex as it would become. The piano moved down to the Wilshire La Brea district. Why? Because our house there was equidistant from Fox and Warner's. My parents could get to their studios respectively in equal time. So what made this piano so interesting? Well, my uncle chose it because it had a particularly lovely tone, especially for a smallish, non-9-foot concert grand. But also because he knew that not only did my parents play in the studios, they were one half of a famous string quartet, and they were part of the ever-growing popular music industry in Los Angeles, particularly for Capitol Records. With all those things, some of the greatest musicians in the world would come to the house to either work with my parents, play chamber music with them, come over for dinners and discussions. And then this piano was always brought up. So it didn't matter if it was Igor Stravinsky, or if it was Nat King Cole, or if it was Art Tatum, the great jazz pianist, or in particular Frank Sinatra. All these people came and played on that piano. They wanted to experience the sound and eventually the history, because over the years, after my dad passed away, my mother kept the piano, and she would entertain also some of the greatest artists in the world, Vladimir Horowitz, Artur Rubinstein, others from the film industry. John Williams was at our house all the time and at her apartment. Well, the piano came to me about 30 years ago, I think, during my time in Washington, D.C. And as the director of the orchestra there, I had the occasion to invite some of the artists of my time over to the house, whether it was Lang Lang or Emmanuel Axe or the jazz pianist Michel Camillo. All these people came to the house because, one, I loved to cook for them, but two, I wanted to hear how they sounded on the piano. The piano remains now in the house. It survived a trip to Detroit and now back to St. Louis, where I've lived for almost 7 years now. And artists continue to come over and experience that wonderful sound and get the story of the history of the piano.
Yeah, it's the history. I can just see Emmanuel Axe saying, "I want to play on the piano that Stravinsky played on,
Right.
that Horowitz played on." Now, as you've been here, you came to town first as the assistant conductor,
1968.
and then you were later the music director. And in your time here, I think you really boosted the sound of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra and especially the prestige of it. And you did that in two different ways, through records and through tours. Let's talk about the records. What records did you make with them? What did you do to make the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra what it is today?
In some ways, it was slightly by accident. When I was the assistant in '68, the new music director of the orchestra was my teacher and mentor, Walter Susskind. And naturally, it was assumed that any big projects would go to the music director. I was just the second guy. I was there waiting for somebody to get sick so I could jump in and have my big break. Well, in 1974, the orchestra penned an agreement with Vox Records, which was really the very first budget label for classical music. They wanted to make a big splash for the orchestra's first discs. Master Susskind really wanted to do Dvorak and Smetana, and Beethoven perhaps. And then someone suggested that maybe Gershwin would be interesting. It wasn't a particular anniversary, but it turned out that even though his output for orchestra was minimal, if we exclude shows and soundtracks, it could be done on 3 recordings, 3 long-playing discs. But Mr. Susskind said, I'm not the person for this. This is what Leonard does. And amazingly, the first recordings of what we would call that modern era were made by me with the St. Louis Symphony and not its music director.
And when was this?
It was in 1974.
And that album was a huge hit.
It was amazing.
And it has never gone out of print.
Never gone out of print, and now has been
that's
remastered.
That's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It has not been out of print.
And it was
I did that math in my head.
very good.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm impressed. And you said you couldn't count.
Yeah.
You did. So that album, or the recordings, have been remastered several times. The new one is absolutely stunning. It sounds really fantastic. One little history note that was fun. Last season with the orchestra here, we played a set of concerts that more or less looked at the heritage of the ephemeral and jazz culture as it relates to concert music. And so Gershwin figured prominently on every program. And we brought back the same pianist who played all the music for piano and orchestra, the 2 Rhapsodies, the I Got Rhythm Variations, and the Concerto for Orchestra, Jeffrey Siegel. So we reunited. There was no one left in the orchestra from when we recorded 50 years ago. But a few people certainly knew about it, and people turned out in droves to hear it. I look back on those recordings as being a very important turning point for the orchestra. It put them on the radar, not only in this country, but internationally. Vox was respected worldwide. And eventually, when Mr. Susskind left, and then was succeeded by a man named Jerzy Semkov, who was only here for a few years, and then I came back, Vox stayed in the picture. So we recorded all the works of Rachmaninoff. We recorded Prokofiev. We did Mussorgsky, many things. After Vox kind of dropped off the radar here, RCA picked us up. And the first recording we made with them, which was 10 years after the Gershwin, was a symphony by Sergei Prokofiev, his 5th. And that first recording won a Grammy. It was amazing.
The first of your 6 Grammys?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was done here.
That's only 6 more Grammys than I have. So yeah, it's not that impressive.
How many Pulitzers?
We have the same number.
We do.
Yes,
See, so
we
it works
do.
out.
Yeah, great. So let's talk Gershwin, or not Gershwin in particular, but you're well known for promoting the music of American composers. I say as you take a sip of your wine.
Go ahead.
Why do you focus so much on American composers?
It would be like asking, why would a German conductor focus on Beethoven? Why would a French conductor focus on Ravel? Why would a Russian conductor focus on Tchaikovsky? It's part of my heritage. It's in my blood. I feel it. But because my family also has a Russian heritage, we did a lot of music by Russian composers on discs. And that carried through all the labels we did. The thing with the American music was, when I started here as music director, the focus of music in America itself was changing. The music directors had moved away from this Slavic repertoire. Now it's not so much Tchaikovsky anymore, but now it was becoming more Bruckner, Strauss, Mahler, Brahms, because the music directors had a more Austro-Germanic center.
Yes, those are all German conductors.
Right.
German
And
and
Austrians.
Austrian.
So I thought we had a niche now to move into the Russian repertoire where most music directors weren't really doing it. But I kept the American up, both what we would call the classic American scores, composers like Aaron Copland, William Schumann, Leonard Bernstein, Charles Ives, but also the new composers. We had composers in residence here for 12 of my years. It started with Joseph Schwander, then Joan Tower, then Donald Erb, and then Claude Baker. They stayed for 3 years. They worked in the community, working in schools. They wrote pieces for the orchestra. They wrote pieces for those schools. And I thought it was important to balance playing the classic Americans with the contemporary. And it is probably the other way, in addition to the touring and the recording, that we made our mark. We became known as the American Orchestra, more so than the orchestra where I would go next, which was in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
We were the American Orchestra.
We have time for just one more question. So I'd like to ask about something you mentioned to me earlier. You said that when you came here as an assistant conductor, you very quickly started what became what you think will be your longest lasting legacy here in St. Louis. What was that?
That was the St. Louis Symphony Youth Orchestra. I started in 1968. Growing up in Los Angeles, there was really there were many opportunities for young people to play in youth orchestras.
And you yourself played
in school,
youth
and I did.
Orchestras.
I played in my junior high and high school, but I played in other youth orchestras where people from all parts of the city came together. And that experience to me was formative, really incredible. I came here and there was no youth orchestra, one of the few major cities not to have one. So literally the first thing I said I wanted to do was to start a youth orchestra. And in 1969, we had auditions, listened to 600 or so young people who came from all over, some 120 miles away to audition. Wow. We selected, I think, 125. And when I think about memorable moments in music, perhaps none was sweeter than when I gave the first beat and my child came to life. What pleases me most is that this orchestra has gone on to thrive. They've toured, they play regular series, they work really extensively with the St. Louis Symphony itself. Now, most of the people don't go into music, and that's fine, but they have this in their background. There's really nothing like it. I suppose you could say to some degree that sports can do that, but it's on a very limited basis. You're only going to have 5, 7, 9, 11 people playing at a time. With an orchestra, you've got all these people coming from all over, gelling for most of the year, becoming one with all this music from the past, bringing it back to life. And this stays with people. And it doesn't really matter what kind of music they play. Duke Ellington has the best line. He says there's only 2 kinds of music. There's good music and there's the other stuff. And we get to determine both. So the youth orchestra, like so many orchestras now, ventures into all aspects of the musical spectrum as it exists in this soon-to-be concluded first quarter of the 21st century. I'm so proud and happy to have started it, and who knows what happens to the recordings? Who knows what history says, if anything, about my time? But the youth orchestra is always going to be here.
All right. Thank you so much, Leonard Slatkin. Thank all of you.
Thank you, Dan.
Very nicely done, for sure. And I'm glad we got to see Leonard Slatkin. And again, my thanks to Leonard and to Dan Neiman of the Post for having that conversation. Now we're going to hear from Garrett and Stacy Enlow about the once upon a time, not really all that long ago, there was a great St. Louis nightclub, a music club called Mississippi Nights. It was good. That was a great historic place in historic Laclede's Landing. After our program, Garrett and Stacy will be in the gift shop, which, if you haven't seen, it's the brand new gift shop here at the History Museum, and they'll be talking to people and, of course, offering to sign their book. So please welcome the Enlows.
Hello, good morning. There's our baby. Took us 4 years to write. We are a husband and wife, and our marriage survived writing a book together.
I'm gonna be over here.
Okay. So you can see Stacy, she's a little shorter than me.
It all started really when Garrett discovered that Mississippi Nights was something before Mississippi Nights. It was a River Rat, and then we also found out that it was called the Stage Door and On the Rock, so it was 3 other clubs before it was Mississippi Nights. And then we dove down the rabbit hole and found out what else it was.
Yeah, this is a picture from 1875. This is a drawing, and you can see the little red arrow. That's where the Mississippi Nights building was. It's in the drawing. And if you look about 5 buildings to the left, you'll see the Sundeckers building, which still stands today. Let's see.
It was mostly a pork packing facility for most of its time, and it was also a paper bag making company too. And then in 1976, it was bought by Steve Dugelbeis and Tom Duffy. And Steve was the visionary, and he wanted a place where local musicians could play in a smaller club, and national acts could also come before they made it big. So here are some of our local bands. You may notice at the bottom there is a young Illinois native, Michael Stipe, who's now in REM, in the band Bad Habits. And here are some of the national acts that played during Steve and Tom's time at Mississippi Nights.
You'll notice that AC/DC played Mississippi Nights. It was their 9th concert in America, and they made $400 that night. We are proud with the AC/DC story. The Mississippi Nights story is in other AC/DC, other books, but we have it correctly in our books. There was a little fight after the show, and we were able to get that story correct in our book, and I'm very happy about that.
In 1979, real estate guy Rich Frame bought Mississippi Nights.
With the book, I wanted to have as many
Okay.
St. Louis Laclede's Landing things in it as possible. This is some of the bars that were on the landing in 1985. If you were down there on the landing in 1985, all you needed was about $25, and you could go to 7 or 8 bars. It was a great time.
You notice number 29 is starred. That's where Mississippi Nights was. And at that time, there was a parking lot across the street that later became the Embassy Suites, and eventually the casino.
The Spaghetti Factory is still on there. Big Fun played Mississippi Nights 417 times. We have to represent them. They played there the most. Big Fun was, before they were Big Fun, they were called Ferrari.
They were the house band most of the 80s.
And then as we go along, here's some of the other genres that played Mississippi Nights. We had a little bit of everything. So you could have reggae one night and then rap the next night.
Rich Frame always said that they played just about everything except for opera and classical. We had grunge, rap, metal, Zydeco, surf music.
And we have an excuse to have 2 Live Crew at the History Museum on the screen there, if you guys are familiar with them. And of course, the Urge, they are still active, and you'll see we have
Melissa Etheridge, Bo Diddley,
everybody
all the
play there.
genres.
So the building was torn down on September 20th, 2007. This is a picture of right before they tore it down. I was unable to track down the person who took this picture, so it's not in the book, but the building was torn down in 2007 to pull up a parking lot for the casino. And here is Kyle and Max. This is exactly where Mississippi Knights would have stood, and there they are. They have a guardrail there, but that's exactly where it used to be.
It was bought out for the casino, and they were supposed to have a phase 2 where they were going to build condos and retail spaces and things like that, but that was in 2008 when the financial crisis hit, and it didn't happen, so.
And that's our book.
We'll see you all out by the
Took us
gift
4
shop.
years to write, and we have a lot more to say, but we don't have much time. But thank you, and we'd like to meet all of you afterwards. How did we do?
Great. Thank you very, very much. Very nice story. Very nice place. A lot of entertainment there for sure. And again, the book will be in the gift shop, and they will be signing it. Oh, and there have been countless music venues over time in St. Louis. For example, George Edick's Club Imperial in West Florissant and Goodfellow. For many of us, saw Ike and Tina Turner for the first time. And over all our city's history, there was no bigger entertainment district than Gaslight Square. To help us remember, not just the square, but the music of the square, because the square really was about music. And some of the places and performers that were there, we have Dan Warner. Dan, would you come down? For years, he had one of the best, if not the best, record shop in our St. Louis area, Webster Records on Lockwood in Webster Groves, and he also owned the Gaslight record label. So we ask you to welcome Dan Warner. Dan is going to tell us a story, a little story about Webster Records, how it started and its history.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. You know what? One of the things I want to add in the beginning here is that Leonard Slatkin, seeing him and remembering that really made collecting classical music cool. And our store specialized in classics and jazz, and we sold a lot of classical music. And I think a lot of it has to go to how cool and approachable Leonard Slatkin was in the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. So I want to shout out to that. Do what? So I think we're
Yeah, take a look at it again. That was nice.
help.
Keep going. We'll get there. One more.
This is Gaslight Square.
This is Gaslight
So
Square.
Johnny's going to tell you a little bit about Gaslight Square, and I'll come back with Webster Records.
Okay. Now, this was a little before Gaslight Square. Now, there was a creative place. It was called the Ringside Tavern. A couple of zany characters doing the jitterbug. This was about 9 years before Gaslight Square in World War II. And you can see in the background it was an all-ladies orchestra at that time, because the men were unfortunately at war. That was on Olive, just a little bit east of what became Gaslight Square. There was now a lot of people don't remember the Hop Key Laundry. O'Connell's would move into that location later, and you can see the original place on Gaslight Square, cleverly named the Gaslight, owned by Richard Mutro. That's in the background. Well, the 1959 tornado did major damage to the square, but it was rebuilt and it became a bigger success. From the Kotobuki Japanese restaurant, we see the square at its best all lit up with 121 gas street lights that were donated by Laclede Gas. Folk singer Frank Moskos moved from his yacht club on the levee to the square, and he took over the Gaslight Bar. He had some help from his wife, Jan Mahana, who was also a folk singer. Crystal Palace, what a place that was. The Crystal Palace that was known for avant-garde theater and a lot of entertainers too, such as this play. I have no idea what it is about. The Son of Zonk. Sounds exciting. The little kid, incidentally, is Sergei Sperber, who lived on the square with his mom in the Musical Arts Building at Boyle and Olive. And during the day, Sergei, I don't know if he ever went to school, he just seemed to hang around everywhere in the square. Here's a handbill for a Crystal Palace production called Let 'Er Rip with Jack Murdoch. And there's Jack on stage in Let 'Er Rip. He was on Channel 2 and 11 here, and he went on to have roles in 50 movies. It's singer Jeannie Trevor, who sang at the Square's Black Horse Music Club. What she's looking at is a poster for the Crystal Palace for an appearance of Gene Krupa and Charlie Ventura in a jazz concert. Well, there's Jay Landesman on the left. He's warning what words cannot be in a play that goes to the Muni. His wife, Fran, is in the Muni. Martin Quigley, who was the first manager of Channel 9, is on the right. They're discussing the script for their musical, Molly Darling, that did play the Muni. That's the Crystal Palace Annex on the right. Dancing was a big deal there. That Stars of Tomorrow sign for the Crystal Palace really lived up to that statement. They presented stars to be, such as Dick Gregory, Alan Arkin, the Smothers Brothers, Woody Allen, Phyllis Diller, and Barbra Streisand as well. See, a sign on the left of the Quartet Très became an international sensation. They played the other side. On the right, it's Russ Lewis's Butterscotch Lounge, a dance club. Let's go inside the Butterscotch, where they're twisting the night away to Jules Blackner and the Teen Tones. Now another inside shot. It's Jack Parker's O'Connell's Pub. The chandeliers there had been in the British Pavilion of the 1904 World's Fair, and they are in the current O'Connell's, which is on South Kings Highway in Shaw. And the music was always inside. It also got outside of O'Connell's, headed down the street. Have a folk singer, well known on the left. That was Chris King. He'd later have a bookstore about mystery books called Big Sleep Books in Euclid. Halloween, look at these characters. 1963, they're at Monteleone's Espresso Coffee House. And that's Jimmy Masucci's Vanity Fair, one of 4 places he owned on the square before he went to Laclede's Landing. Dixieland by Muggsy Sprecher and his Gaslighters. That was big at Bustles and Bows outside the living room. It seems things were a little too loud for one of those revelers headed down the street. There was the dark side and the other side. The other side was an espresso coffee house of modern jazz owned by KXLW DJ Spider Burks, who was billed as the head needle changer and groove duster. Hey, the Don Cunningham group was big at the Islander. This was George S. Edick's Roaring Twenties, a speakeasy-themed night spot. George also owned the Club Imperial at West Florissant and Goodfellow. On the right, we see the Tiger's Den with music by Sammy Gardner and his Mound City Six. That street activity was for a filming of the episode of the TV show Route 66. You can see it on YouTube. It's called Hey Moth, Come Eat the Flame. This was a big publicity stunt. Jack Parker and the Moon Man were set to go to New Orleans on this rubber raft. Oh, that was a mistake. After they just shoved off, Jack jumped out and ran up on the levee. But the Moon Man kept on going. Unfortunately, the raft was beached just north of the MacArthur Bridge. The Moon Man got his name. I don't know his real name. He used to charge a quarter they had a telescope in front of the Gaslight Bar, and for 25 cents, he'd show you the moon. That's Tortilla Flat in 1964, on the day the Cardinals won the World Series, and probably the biggest year for Gaslight Square. What happened to the square? There's Tortilla Flats then. 5 years later, there it is. The Musical Arts Building is gone. And also in 1969, in this part of Olive, at what was the Golden Eagle and the Opera House, the people have been replaced by tumbleweeds. And this is what the square started to look like in 1970, with just about everything gone, and today everything is gone. Now, Dan Warner is here to talk about Webster Records and his records about Gaslight Square.
Yes, well, some of the best years of my life were running Webster Records. I bought it in 1986. And I bought that that's the front of the store on a day like today or yesterday. There's a picture from last night, not really, but it could have been. And the famous sign. And that is Dorothy Gleason right there. She and her husband, Roy Gleason, founded the store in 1953 Roy started it, and I think she worked as a clerk, and then they ended up getting married. That is Roy right there, and I owe everything in the store's history to those two because they built a reputation that was gold, and I just was the young guy who got to take over, and in 1986 I bought it. And there was this part of it that I love sharing music and the stories of music and providing music, selling music to people, but there was also the side of me that I thought I'd like to be part of the creative process. And I got this idea to start a record label, and it was called Gaslight Records. I don't really know where. I guess Gaslight Square was probably one of the impetus for that. But the first recording artist we did was Ralph Sutton, who was born in this area. Ralph was part of the world's greatest jazz band. He probably put out 50 records or more. And he played in the style Mary Ann was playing, the St. Louis Blues. He played stride piano. And we recorded him down at the Bistro live, and we put out 2 albums. And that was fun. And it was great because I got to mix with the artists, which was really cool. And then I thought, Gaslight Square was this just tremendous period of time for St. Louis music and for the glory days. A lot of people who came and visited St. Louis asked where it was. So I thought, let me look into finding the original recordings. Norman Weinstroher founded the label, and he had passed on, and his family had some tapes, but there was this other man named Al Bussin, and he was a customer of the store. And he came in, and I started talking with him. He goes, I think I know where some tapes are. And he goes, I got a couple recording machines. So we moved him into the basement of the record store, and I remastered these recordings with his help. And we put out a CD called In the Afterglow, which I think was about 20 songs from the music. It was Quartet Très Bien, Russ David, Jeannie Trevor, Seal Clayton. I just fell in love with Seal Clayton and her music. But then I thought, we started selling these and people were interested in it. So then I thought, well, let me find some more music that was important to St. Louis. And I thought about, of course, the Scott Joplin house and ragtime music and how it was really part of the formation of the music around the time of the World's Fair. And so I thought, and this is another one, Ragtime at the Rosebud, that we licensed the music for and put out. And then there's the Steamboats, who we're going to hear from Tom Dunn in a few minutes. The Steamboat era and the music that came up the rivers impacted St. Louis in such a big way. And then we recorded Ray Kennedy, who at that time, he's since deceased, but he was one of the younger guys from St. Louis playing amazing music. And then I put this one out. This was really one of my favorites, which was the music of the World's Fair. And it was ragtime and music of that era. And I got to say that the Missouri Historical Society gift shop was one of the impetus for me to figure out what I should try to capture and record for history, if you will. Because they would be selling the CDs for me, and they'd say, hey, we got a lot of people coming in looking for this. And so I have to give a shout out to the Missouri Historical Society for their help in these. So anyway, that is my presentation. I appreciate being part of this. Thank you, Johnny, for asking me. And we'll see you down the road.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. Well, just as the recent Missouri History Museum St. Louis Sound exhibition, which was great, and I was pleased to be in it, couldn't cover all types of music in St. Louis. It's the same for our 1 hour together today. We're not going to get into opera, country, and western, progressive rock, the big band era, modern jazz, folk, gospel, or ethnic music, but a lot of it came up the river or down the river. So we're going to take you to the river right now with the powerful influencer music from the excursion boats as we look back on Streckfus steamers. To do so, we introduce you to Tom Dunn, who has been, was with Streckfus steamers for a long time. I think about 49 years. Tom, am I right, 49 years?
Time flies when you're having fun. Yes.
Doesn't it, though?
Yes. Well, no, Streckfus Steamers, if you're not familiar with it, is a company that's been on the river for quite a few years. It was the company itself was on the river for 100 years. Commodore Streckfus started the company in 1891, and he had 4 sons, all of which became riverboat captains. And as time went on, they operated the largest fleet of passenger vessels on the Mississippi, from New Orleans to St. Paul to New Orleans to Pittsburgh, and they'd stop at all the towns along the way. And when you look at the history of the company, what made them so successful was the music they had on board. The last big boat they built was, of course, we all remember the Admiral and the wonderful music that was aboard the Admiral, but it was part of the Streckfist tradition. Commodore Streckfist started introducing music on the boats long before anybody else did, and they had these large dance floors. But around 1917, they were operating boats out of New Orleans, and there's an area in New Orleans called Storyville, which is the red light district designated by the city to kind of control that entertainment. And the federal government closed it down in 1917 because the sailors were having too good a time over there, and they just shut it down entirely. But in those brothels or whatever were some of the finest young musicians who also entertained. They also had restaurants and so on. Well, all of these young men were out of a job. And Commodore Streckfist went through New Orleans and picked out the very best of those musicians, young fellas. And he'd come up to them and say, listen, how would you like a job where you're playing every day with some of the best musicians in the country, and you get 3 meals a day, room and board, plus we take you all the way up to St. Paul in the summertime where it's nice and cool and you get away from all this heat here in New Orleans? And they signed up right away. So they would, what we call tramping, they would leave New Orleans and stop at all the towns along the way, and depending upon the population and so on, that would determine how long the boat would stay there. Just like, say, a traveling circus or whatever. But in the Midwest, these folks had never heard this kind of music before. He hired all these great jazz musicians, all young men, and they got to be known as, well, one of those boats was called the JS, named after John Streckfist, and so it got to be known as JS music, and some believe that's the origin of jazz. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what some claim. But he would, these folks would never hear music in the Midwest. You didn't have radios. The only time you heard music, if you went to church, or maybe you had a piano at home or a bandstand. But for a band to come into town with a huge dance floor with a 10-piece great musicians, it was quite a deal. So it developed quite a reputation as he went up. Some of the musicians, one of which was Louis Armstrong, played on our boats for years as a young man, first job he ever had. And Pops Foster, Baby Dobbs. Louis Armstrong, Captain Streckfist was being German, and if you're going to play in this band, you have to be able to read music. Well, he didn't know how to read music, so Louis Armstrong, all he's called playing on the boats was like going to a conservatory. They taught you everything. You're going to play at this beat. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. And it actually formalized his training. So as his time went on, as he left, went on to Chicago, he was really, really well established. So the boats continue to have great music on board them. As they went up the river in St. Louis here, we had the JS and the St. Paul, later the President Riverboat. And then finally in the 40s, we had the Admiral. And of course on the Admiral, we had Johnny Polson, 10-piece band during the day, and Bobby Cuban with a 14-piece band every night. And we were selling out in the 70s, 4,000 people on Friday and Saturday nights. It was quite an era.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay.
Tom Dunn from Streckfist Steamers. Well, let's see what we have here. Oh, I know, we have this. It is a poster inviting one and all to hiss the villain and cheer the hero on the Goldenrod showboat stage. Goldenrod, this is what it looked like downtown. We started in 1937 here in St. Louis, and it became home of the National Annual Ragtime Music Festival. There was always great music on The President. Here's a nice shot of The President, preceded the Admiral. This is from 1934. We go inside. The ladies would like to hang out in the wicker lounge of The President. The hull of this boat, the railroad ferry Albatross, as we see here, became the hull of the Admiral. Kind of hard to imagine that, but they had great foresight in creating this. This was a huge, huge vessel that used to carry steam engines and trains. The Admiral, under construction. This is from 1938. The ironwork was done by Steelwork Banner Ironworks, right over where O'Connell's is today. From 1940, here's an interesting ad. Makes the Admiral look like about 10 blocks long. It is just a great ad from 1940 when the Admiral opened. Now this is a look at the lounge inside the Admiral, kind of similar to the wicker lounge that was on the President. From 1945, we've got a couple of friends here, the Admiral, shiny and bright, and Eads Bridge in the background. 2 decades later, well, the Admiral still was shiny and bright, and in the background, something else shiny and bright was going up, the Gateway Arch. The Admiral had 4 ladies' rooms, very fancy, each one like this one. This is Glamour, one of the Admiral's ladies' rooms, and there was, as we said, no better dance floor than that of the Admiral. Well, Tom, thank you again. Our riverboat pictures are all from the collection of the Missouri Historical Society's Library and Research Center. That's in the former United Hebrew Temple at 225 South Skinker, the other side of the park, and it's open to the public. You get a lot of good information there. I'm sure most of you have heard Bernie Hayes on the radio. Maybe you've met him at Webster University or Harris Stowe State University. He's here to talk about rhythm and blues music of St. Louis and the National Blues Museum, of which Bernie is executive director. Incidentally, if you haven't been there, it's great. It's at 615 Washington in the old Stixbeer and Fuller building. And I've known Bernie for decades and used to listen to him on KSOL in San Francisco, where we each did morning drive shows. He was on a half hour before I was on, so I'd heard him for a while. Well, I was on KAWB when I was known as Pete Bunny in those days. So I came back to St. Louis and for a time was broadcast consultant for CATS, KATZ Radio, and they said, you know, what we want to do is modernize the format of the station. That's why they hired me. And the first person I thought about, they wanted some new DJs, was Bernie Hayes. So I gave him a call. Never thought he would come from San Francisco to St. Louis. I offered him the job, and he said, I'll be there. Just like he said today, I'll be there, and he's here. Much to my surprise and thanks, he took the job, and he's been with us for a heck of a long time. So please welcome Bernie Hayes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ron. Like I said, it was like he said, he's the one who brought me here from San Francisco in 1965, April 22nd, 1965. So it's coming April to be 60 years. But I'd like to say between Johnny Rabbit and Frank Apsher, they kind of guided me through the landscape of St. Louis media. But I'm not here to talk not much about music as to the history of black radio. Gospel music evolved naturally into the blues and jazz and other subgenres. But black radio was the catalyst for it all. There'd be no black radio, no blues museum without black radio. There'd be no civil rights movement, no modern day civil rights movement without black radio. We were the voice of that movement. We never received the recognition that we deserved. WERD in Atlanta, WDIA, Memphis, Tennessee, WVON, Chicago, KTZ here in St. Louis. We were the ones that told the movements of Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, and others involved in those libertarian events. Blues music is one of the main features, I assume, of Webster music. But there's so much to talk about. Gospel was the original music that came over from the bellies of the slave ships, the chants, the hymns, and it evolved to the different genres that you know about today. I didn't come with a prepared script. I just thought maybe I'd do it off the cuff. But I'd like to show you some images of some good trouble I got into often in the city of St. Louis. Well, let me go back. And they're not in order. This is KKSS, which is now Magic 108. We got in this trouble because I was the program director and general manager and operations manager of the station, but a young man white guy named Scott St. James was below me, but he was getting paid more than me. And so I asked Alan Eisenberg, who was pictured there, and John Machuro, why is he making more money than me? His answer was, white people always make more money than black people. So that started that. We sued them and we won that suit. This is another portion of that. That was back in 1975, I believe. This is a KWK. We walked off the station there because Joe Amaturo and Clifton Gates bought into the station along with the Bass family out of Detroit, Michigan. So we started KWK, and we were the ones that revitalized KWK. They had lost their license. In 1969, Scoop Sanders and I reopened the station. And pretty soon after we did so well, they decided to bring in some white people from Memphis, Tennessee to program to the black community. And we didn't think that was fair either, and they were going to pay them much more than they paid us. So we struck again. This is St. Louis American from 1977. KKS Radio accused of harassing Bernie Hayes from the firing line. And I'm showing these because in each incident, I was backed up by the public. The St. Louis listening public always supported our movements, and we were successful in each of our efforts. Well, that's me back in 1964 in Chicago. And here's Stereo in Black, groom station white man for a managing position. These are just some of the things that we had to go through. This is a picture of KTC in 1965. That's Chuck Cunningham at the top row. It's James Brown. That's me next to James Brown. Jerome Dixon and Buster Jones, who's now in California. Doug Eason sitting down in Robert B. Q. These are the jocks in 1965. I'd like for you to know that the National Black Radio Hall of Fame and the National Blues Museum are open to the public. But the National Black Radio Hall of Fame is located at Harris Stowe State University. And we're open. I'm the curator there. And we'd like for you to come by and see the history, true history of black radio. I can't do it in this time period that limited time that we have today. But anyway, here's another piece of history from the Riverfront Times. You remember the Riverfront Times, any of you? Well, that's me on the cover. It says, "Cat's got his tongue." Another incident we had to start and correct the disrespect that we were getting in St. Louis. I just want to say thank you, John Rabbit. Thank you for all of you who are allowing me to come here and share this brief interview. If you get a chance, come by Harris Stowe State University and HBCU and the National Black Radio Hall of Fame. We're located there along with the Wolf Jazz Institute. Thank you so much. You want to know more information about this? Get my book. It's called The Death of Black Radio. And you find that entertaining, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernie Hayes. Wonderful. Bernie Hayes understands, I'll tell you. And that's it for our show for today. We thank all of you for being here, braving the cold weather. Hope you've enjoyed yourself. We've learned a lot about radio, a lot about the music of St. Louis. And I thank all of our participants today. And the in-laws are upstairs at the gift shop signing their book. I may be able to see some of you a little later on before you leave the building. stick around because a lot of other things to see at the Missouri History Museum. And we'll be doing another show in the not-too-distant future, but I will be on the radio on KMOX this coming Sunday morning. I do a Sunday morning feature every week, and it's from 8:50 to 9, so you got to get up early. 8:50 to 9. It's about a 10-minute feature. This week I'm going to be talking about the caves under St. Louis. And I'll also be doing a program, a special Welcome to the New Year program, New Year's Day from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on KMOX. I hope you can listen, and I hope to get to see you again. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you.